everyone, welcome to my June tag for Tim Holtz's 12 tags of 2015. This one's a little bit late since I'm doing it in August. I don't know where the time goes sometimes. So that was Tim's inspiration, and let's see where I end up. I'm going to start with a craft tag like he did, and as usual I use my little trusty template to make my tag shapes. And I've got my 3-inch square, and as I'm looking at this I'm noticing that things are a little bit invisible on this craft mat because it's craft coloured and so is my tag. So we will see how we get on, whether I move onto a different surface so that you can see what I'm doing later on. Tim used one of his stencils to make a lovely tartan background, and I'm going to do the same, except I'm using slightly different mediums to do it because I don't have the smaller inkers in order to use ink on my tag, so I'm going to be using my distress paint with a little addition of a purple acrylic paint so that I get the colours that I want on my tag. So I am going to be using the green and the white that Tim had on his original tag, but I'm going to mix in a little bit of the purple as well. So I'm using this stencil, just trying to read what it's called, Stripes it's called, funnily enough, trying to read it upside down on my stencil. And I'm going to be using my Picket Fence and Peeled Paint Distress paints, and I've got a purple Dovecraft, or is it Dove Art, looking at the label, paint, so that I get that little touch of purple, and I'm going to be applying that with a little piece of dry foam. So I want to create stripes in the first instance using my colours, and then I'm going to imprint them onto my tag. And you can see I'm just putting the paint in stripes on the stripes so that the stencil is covered in one or other of the 3 colours I've chosen to use. And because the applicator's fairly small on the distress paints, it's allowing me to create stripes without completely covering with one colour. Then I'm flipping my stencil over onto my tag and then carefully pressing it against the tag. I'm using a piece of kitchen roll to make sure that I don't get any seepage, and I have got my first set of stripes. So 2 things to think about is drying time. When you add your paint to your stencil, it's okay with the distress paints because they do take a little bit longer to dry, but you need to be a little bit more careful with your acrylic paint that has a quicker drying time. So I'm trying to remember to add that last, and then I'm going to come across in the opposite direction, so turning 90 degrees, and I've still got paint on the top of my stencil and a lovely tartan background. So I'm not going to bother cleaning my stencil, I'm going to keep going for my 3-inch square. So just following the stripes that I've already got in place, adding more paint, and then a little bit of that purple, and printing in one direction to start with, and then in the opposite direction to get that tartan effect. It really is a lovely technique, and I definitely one I'll be using again with this stencil. And then it's time to clean up. I just spray with a little bit of water, and just to show you that you could create some more stripes if you want to. Because I am a little bit behind, 2 months to be precise, I've got June and July's tag to get completed. I've just finished August's, and I'll actually be early with that one once I get it up and online. I'm going to upload tonight. But so this, I'm going to see if I can get June and July's caught up in the month of August. So I was thinking about them so that I could have a little bit of an idea where I was going with the design. So for this one I didn't have the coffee cup that Tim used on his tag, nor do I have a huge great love of coffee, just the odd one now and again. So I am going to chocolate milkshake, that's what I should have done. I had an idea to put a birdhouse on the background, and I don't know why, for some strange reason it came along with a little saying in my head, and you'll see a little bit become clearer as we go along. So I started out by sketching out a funny little birdhouse shape, and then I decided actually they're not quite big enough for what I want to do, so I'm going to draw them slightly bigger. As usual, I'm working on my tag and my little 3-inch square at the same time. And then once I'm happy with the size, I'm cutting it out ready to go on my tag. It's a little bit better. Some of the elements of my little birdhouse. I'm going to cut out the roof, the little stand and the perch and little bird front door, the little hole in the birdhouse. So I'm just tracing around the original pattern and then I'm going to cut these pieces out. Sometimes when I'm making these videos, I am trying to be clear in what I'm telling you that I'm doing, but at the same time, every now and again I catch myself with really poor diction. So when I say cut it out, I should say cut it out. So apologies for my lazy pronunciation. So I'm going to be decorating the fronts of my birdhouses, and I thought at first that I was going to draw the design onto the birdhouse. Then I thought actually it'd be much quicker if I just give myself a white base and then paint it freehand, as it's quite small. So just getting rid of the green from doing those stripes, and then I'm going to cover the fronts of the birdhouses with white picket fence distress paint. So drying in between the layers until I get the depth of coverage that I want. Distress paint has got a slightly longer drying time than normal acrylics, and I'm quite happy with that sort of mottled effect, so I'm stippling it on with the applicator until I get the desired depth of coverage. And then once it's all dry, I'm ready to start painting on my flowers. You can see I wasn't too bothered about going over the roof and the little bottom plinth because they are going to be covered up by the decoupage elements. So same here, I'm not too worried about going over the actual whole section on the front of the birdhouse. I'm just getting that design into position. So I'm doing a really simple flower shape, just using the brush to make little petals, and I've made a slightly lighter colour purple than the one that I've used to create the stripes, and then when I outline the flowers I'll use the darker purple. So I'm literally just covering the entire face of this little birdhouse with some freehand painted flowers. Easy peasy. So let that dry, and this time I'm just going to be a little bit more delicate with my touch because I want slightly smaller petals. So, but the technique's the same, I'm just not applying quite so much pressure, and I've got a little bit less paint on my brush each time. And that way I get a finer tip on my paintbrush and therefore finer petals. I start out by lining onto wet paint and realise that's not going to work, so I'm going to dry it off, and then I'm going to come back in with the dark purple to go around the outside of my flowers. Just keeping it really simple, and I'm not too worried that they're not perfect. Now it occurs to me, if you're new to my tag videos, that you may be wondering why I'm making a tag and a little 3-inch square. Well, I'm intending to do a little sampler at the end of the year with all of my little 3-inch squares. So my 3-inch squares look similar to my tags by the time they're finished, just in a smaller scale, so that I can capture all 12 months and make a sort of patchwork collage of them, and I can use that as a home decor piece, and a really good reminder of all the fun that I've had making these tags and playing along with this challenge. So again, I'm making sure that I've got a tiny bit of paint on my brush so I can keep the tip nice and fine in order to do the detail on this smaller birdhouse. And then I'm just using the end of my fine paintbrush just to dot some centres into the middle of the flowers, and it's not quite big enough for these big flowers, so I'm looking around and grabbing hold of a slightly bigger brush to put the dots in the centre of the larger flowers. Next I want to bring in some green, so the best way to do that is to put some leaves on my flowers. So coming in with the peeled paint, just making it slightly lighter with the intention that I'm going to line the leaves afterwards, and then just adding some random leaves anywhere that I've got room to fit them on the design. Now, alternatives to actually painting this design is drawing it with, say, something like a pro marker, or you could use your Inktense pencils or something like that, watercolour pencils, in order to draw a design on your birdhouse if you're not too happy about painting something with a paintbrush. So like I said, I'm not going for perfection here. I'm not trying to have the most perfect flower design. This is supposed to look hand painted, and you'll see why when we get to the little quote that I'm going to use on this tag. Mind you, I am still doing my best. I want the best dressed birdhouse in town. So drying everything off, and then I thought about lining it with the green paint, but I haven't made enough of a distinction between the two shades of colour. So I'll go back to that shortly once the paint is dry, and I am now just going around everything, giving it a slight edge with the white. And I really do like my distress paints for doing this. The applicator's perfect just to get a little touch of colour around any of the shapes you might be using on a project. And it's just got a sort of wispy feel to it. As long as you haven't got too much paint on your applicator, it's almost a bit like dry brushing using the applicator of the distress paint. And now I'm looking for the bottom piece of the little birdhouse. I think it's peeking out just under my craft mat, so I'll find that in a moment. And I'm going to layer these up with foam pads, just making that decision there. So I've got some foam tape, and I'm just going to sit the pieces to finish off my little birdhouses. And you can see it just finishes everything off nicely. Looking good. And some smaller pieces of foam tape on the tiny birdhouse. There we go, found it. A little bit of paint and on we go. And now I am going to cut out some freehand circles for the last two elements on the tag, on the birdhouse, sorry. But this is a little bit fiddly, but you can see I've got 4 little circles. They don't look too bad on camera actually. I've edged them in white, including my fingers, and I am adding the little hole on a piece of foam pad, but I'm adding the little perch flat, or what would be the perch if this was a 3D object. So my birdhouses are complete, and I'm ready to move on to the next step. It does have a little bit of sewing on his tag, but I'm using it because it brings my collage pieces together. All of my collage pieces have got a little frame of sewing going on. Now I start out with a white thread, but it really doesn't show up very much, so I'm going to go around a second time with a green. So you can see here I've been around once with the white, And now I'm going around a second time with the bright green thread that you can see on the spool from this overhead shot. And by just adding that tiny touch of green, it makes me decide that I'm going to frame the whole thing with a green frame as well. Now, green is a colour that I use a lot, but I just didn't have enough of the right shade that I wanted. This sort of, well, it's peel paint colour basically, sort of a leafy green colour, and I just didn't have enough, so I've had to break into a brand new sheet and create some more scraps. And I'm just mounting each of my pieces, my tag and my little square, onto a fine green frame, and then adding a reinforced circle to the top of my tag. You can see how everything's coming together. I think I've finished with the messy, so getting rid of the craft mat. And then I'm coming back in and lining the leaves on the flowers now that I'm sure that the paint's dry, and I'm just using one of my Pitt pens just to add a little bit of detail onto those leaves. Now, I was all ready with the quote that I wanted to use. I knew exactly what I want to say on this tag, but I couldn't quite make up my mind how I wanted to put it on there. I know that I want a branch coming across the top of the tag and the little square to hang my birdhouse from, so I have to be aware of where I'm going to put it. And I do like the look of little word strips, but I just couldn't get the right colour pen. I wasn't happy with the white, just wasn't quite sure where I was going with it. Where would I put the words? Where am I going to put the little birdhouses? How am I going to leave enough room for the date on the little 3-inch square, etc., etc., all going through my mind, but I get there in the end. Now I'm going to have a lot of scrapbookers sympathising with me here. Over the years, I have bought tons and tons of sets of letter stickers, and they are all housed in this box. I've got all different sizes, made with all sorts of different materials, and I never, ever, ever have the right ones. So I'm going to rummage through here to see if I can find a set of letters that I can use rather than handwriting on this tag. If not, if I can't find anything, then I will be off to print out my own on my computer. So I'm going through sorting out all of the smaller letters that I have in my quite vast collection, and you can see on the table I've just put out a set of white little letter stickers, and I am going to end up using those. Also found a couple of wooden embellishments that I might use on my tag, so I'm just giving them a little dusting with the white distress paint. So I'm going to emphasize 2 words with my little saying, or in my little saying, and obviously I'm going to need to use a slightly smaller font on my 3-inch square than I've got room to use a slightly bigger one on my tag. And I'm just thinking about how I'm going to place the quote on my tag, but I'm going to use a combination of white and purple strips. So they're my 2 green ones, and then I'm going to move on to the purple ones. So sometimes you have to think on your feet as you're putting things together. There's always a point where you start to stick things down. You always sort of keep things till the last minute because you're not really sure where you're going to position the final pieces. You can see I've added the month of June to my little sampler piece, and I'm using the same letter stickers that I've used on all the pieces so far. Then I wanted to fit the branch in before I did the final part of the quote to make sure that I got a branch on there. So I've used a Tim Holtz die to cut my branches out of some craft cardstock, but the leaves on the strip were a little bit too big for what I wanted, so I'm going to use a punch to give myself some teeny tiny leaves. So I've just brushed over the craft branches, and you can see here I was trying the leaves that come in the set, but there wasn't a small enough version of the leaf for my liking. And I'm also going to be using some string. So I'm tying some string through the top of the tag. I've got about 4 layers of string, and then I'm just trimming them off and then unraveling them so it gives an even more fluffy tassel on the top of my tag. This is just garden twine, so it really is easy to unravel, and you can see I get a lovely fluffy effect. Well, it's like a hairdo. So then I'm going to stick my branches into position so that I know where my little house is going to sit on each of my tags, or on my tag and my sampler. You can see I've attached the little wooden heart, and I'm also going to add a little bit of string, so removing those letters again and tying on a little bit of twine. I like the look and I wanted to include the twine on my smaller piece. And I liked the look of it so much, although you can't see it very well at the moment. I'm adding a little bit of glue to hold it in position as it's right at the end of the sampler. And I'm also adding some white paint to my string just to make it look even more rustic. And I'm going to do the same with the bottom of my main tag. Eventually. I couldn't quite get it to tie, I needed somebody's finger to hold the knot. And then moving it into position and adding a little bit of glue to hold it nicely at the bottom of the tag. So again, you can see I still haven't quite decided where my words are going to go, but I am going to commit and hang my birdhouse from the branch. I've used a foam pad to attach it to the tag, and I want to make a little hanger from a piece of string. So I'm tying a knot at one end and then just tucking it under the birdhouse to hold it into position. And then repeating that with the smaller version. I haven't really got much room to dangle here, but we'll give it a go. Still thinking about where I'm going to put the word June, so moving it over slightly. I don't want the word June to clash with the actual quote, so I really do need it to go in this corner if I can make it fit. And because I've had these stickers on a couple of times, I'm going to add a little bit of glue to make sure that they stay. And adding the word June, there, it fits perfectly. And so back to the quote itself. Now you can see why I painted my little birdhouse. Home is where the art is. So just a little play on words, and I decided to lose the arrows. I didn't really want to bunch things up too much, so I'm going to create the same little quote on the smaller tags, but just cutting the strips nice and small. This time I'm going to be using a white pen because my stickers aren't small enough in order to write my quote. You can see same effect, just on a smaller scale. And then just gluing them into position. And I think I'm almost there, just adding a few veins to the leaves and then shaping them slightly before I attach them to the branches. Having a little bit of a tidy as I come to the end. Still no room for those arrows. They'll come in handy for another project. Just adding a little stitch detail to those hearts. And then I decide I want to add some pearls to the artwork on the front of the houses for a little bit of texture and a little bit of bling. So I'm adding some purple pearls to the centres of my flowers to finish them off, and I think that I'm going to call that job done. A few final little stitch details with my white pen. And I think that that just gives it the finishing touch. So if you have noticed a little eye and message pop out at the top of your screen, whichever kind of device that you're watching my videos on, that's me trying a different method of adding new links to my videos, new places for you to visit. So if you can't see them, if you hover over the top of your screen, whichever you're looking on, may it be a phone or an iPad or a laptop or something like that, you bring up an eye symbol, and that's where video makers like me, just adding Tim's original inspiration to the back of my tag, leave links for you that you might be interested in. As you know, I have my own Etsy shop where I sell online workshops, so that will be one of the links that you might find there. But you can always check at any time at the end of the video or during the video. If you click on the eye symbol, you'll see all of the cards that I've left behind for you to find new and interesting videos to look at, or workshops to buy, or perhaps visit me over at my blog. So they're the kind of links that I tend to leave, and I will also add a link right at the end, so it will bring up the full list of the 5 that I have available to me now that YouTube have changed to this new system. So I hope you've enjoyed watching me get from Tim's inspiration in June to my interpretation in August. If you've enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit the like button, the subscribe button, the share button, and I look forward to sharing more creativity with you again very soon. Don't forget to look out for the eye and find the links. You might find something else along your travels following the links to inspire you to make something of your very own. Until next time, thank you for watching. So here I am with the final link. It will pop up with a little bit of an eye above the project that you're watching, and a little call out will appear and disappear. It doesn't stay on the screen very long, but the eye is always there, and you can always click on that to follow the links once you've finished watching the video. So this one will take you to my Etsy shop, where you can purchase all the instructions you'll need to make that gorgeous tag storage project, and other links that I've left you along the way in my video will perhaps take you to things that might interest you, like this video to make this tag, or the playlist where you'll find the video to make this tag.